and turn it over to you. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks to you and to the Innovate US team for the opportunity to come back and speak to a terrific group of leaders from around the country and indeed around the world. I see in the introductions, a couple of folks are coming from Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where I am right now. I'm at the IBM office in North Bethesda. So I'll speak, if I speak loud enough and you open the window, maybe those of you that are coming from Montgomery County can hear me in an echo form. So thanks again. As Hannah said, I've been working at IBM leading our Center for the Business of Government. I'll talk a little bit about what we do and working on a number of different industry innovation types of capacities. Did a talk earlier a few months ago around AI and sort of service delivery, ethical service delivery, and talked about a couple of examples, taxation, and Veterans Affairs, service delivery. So I know that that's as are all the great programs that Hannah and team bring you are on the Innovate US website, and you're able to access that. So I'll look forward to continuing to look at those as they come on. It's really an honor to be part of this great series. So I'm going to go right into screen sharing, and we tested this before, so let's make sure it works. And then I will go into the presentation. So we're going to start from the beginning. Okay, Hannah, are we all clear? You can see that?
Yep, I can see it.
Great. All right. Well, again, thank you. Two of my favorite topics, artificial intelligence and government procurement, which tells you that I'm not very fun at Thanksgiving in terms of things to talk about, but there it is. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. We'll go through basically, I'll talk about our center. Some of you may have been on the talk a few months ago, but probably most of you weren't. So I'll talk a little bit about the center, and then I'll just sort of give a framework around general considerations on AI and government service delivery, government service provision for procurement or anything else. And then the bulk of the presentation will be around research that our center has done and that I've been involved with around the topic of how artificial intelligence can help improve public procurement. So this is more about how AI can help the government do a better job procuring anything. It's not necessarily about the procurement of AI itself, although I'll touch a little bit about that as well in the discussion, and then we can get into Q&A. And I know we've got a lot of great leaders on the line, so I really encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And then Hannah will work with me to kind of go through the questions and be able to make sure that we get your answers to you and have a good discussion. So what does our center do? We are essentially a think tank inside IBM. We're independent of the business. So we are focused entirely on producing research and thought leadership that helps government leaders in the US and around the world do their jobs better. We work with academic institutions primarily to do the research, university professors who are often leaders in their field. And we work with nonprofit partners to do a number of events. And I'll talk about that as well, because we did that in a couple of different AI cases. You see here our website. All of our information is free and in the public domain. As I mentioned, we're independent, so our point of view is really about what's best for government. We don't advocate for IBM products or services or sell or charge the government in any way. So we're really an independent kind of group inside the company. The four things that we do primarily, the first that I'll talk more about in terms of our research on AI are reports that are produced by academic experts primarily. We produce those reports based on a research agenda that's framed by what government leaders tell us they need to know more about in terms of innovation, new thinking, recommendations for how to proceed, best practice from private sector or other governments. And then we put that research agenda out to the world, the academic world that is, and we basically collect ideas, almost like a peer-reviewed journal article process for those of you that might be familiar with that. And we get a request for proposals, essentially, request for papers and then we down select to a very select few that kind of make it through the process, and we fund those. And you see here 3 examples of papers that we've written in the last few years. I'll talk more about the ones related to the AI and procurement topic as we get into the presentation. But we produce about 15 a year or so. and you see here, and again, all these are available at our website. We also do a weekly podcast. We had a radio show before podcasts were a thing, where we interview a government leader. You see here 3 leaders who we've interviewed. These are actually international leaders for those that are coming from outside the U.S. I think I saw there was at least one person from the UAE in the audience. So on the right side, you see here, we had a digital leader from the Dubai government a couple of years back. We had the CIO of Colombia at the bottom, and the social services minister from Austria. So these are international examples. We have most commonly U.S. government leaders, federal, state, and local, who are coming on and sort of talking about their story, their challenge. And we've got a whole lot of content there. So some of you may have bosses who actually have been on the podcast. So it's a good thing to go to our website and check out what they have had to say over the years. We often are blogging and speaking and writing and engaging in social media conversations through our website. And you see that listed here. And then we do a lot of events. We do a lot of roundtables, both in person and virtual. We have 2 coming up that are, one is on actually AI for social justice and sort of delivering equitable services across the country in different ways that the government provides, and reducing bias in the use of AI to prevent magnification of social, cultural, demographic, racial, ethnic differences. That'll be that roundtable. We're also doing a roundtable on the use of strategic foresight as a discipline for government to really look into the future and make decisions that are not necessarily about today or tomorrow or even next month, but 5, 10 years down the line, where do they want their agencies to go as a discipline. So we do a lot more in the way of roundtables. Those are just 2 that are coming up that I highlight by way of example. So any one of these are featured again on the site, and we can talk more about that as we go. So let me go into the framing discussion around AI for service delivery. We did a roundtable 3 months ago where we brought in leaders from government around sort of the use of ethical AI to improve the delivery of benefits to citizens in need. So this wasn't really procurement related. It was more about providing information. And we heard from leaders and private sector experts about what are the key elements that are needed in order for AI to be used to really magnify and improve government service delivery. And you see here some of the points that came out of the discussion, which are going to be themes that come back in the procurement context. Points about explainability and fairness and transparency, protecting privacy of individuals, empowering the government workforce, a very important point in terms of using AI to improve public procurement, because a lot of procurement executives don't necessarily have a lot of background in AI, including frameworks that support AI implementation so that you don't just kind of try something without some sort of a roadmap for how to move forward. And we'll talk a little bit about AI maturity models in a moment. And then importantly, and I'll kind of repeat this at various points, AI is not always the answer. It's not the magic elixir that's going to solve every problem. It may not be appropriate. It may be more than is necessary to address a particular problem, or it may not be the right tool in terms of an analytics approach. So understanding the problem that's being addressed and how AI can help, and are there other alternatives that might be able to help more, that's all part of the government's decision process that came out. So some of the principles that underlie use of AI with any tool, procurement or otherwise. The first principle that we always talk about that came through in the roundtable, AI is about enabling people to make better decisions. It's not about replacing people in the decision-making process. It's used to augment people to give them information, to enable them to make better services. In the procurement case, to understand better the set of requirements that might be needed, to understand better the universe of vendors that could provide innovative responses to that requirement, to oversee their performance, et cetera. The second principle is that when AI algorithms kind of go through what most people think of as the black box to produce data that might come to us in the form of a chatbot or something that when we're talking through an AI experience with a government or a commercial enterprise, that data can travel through lots of different channels. And it's important to make sure that we understand that data belongs to the creator of the data, that the as that data moves through a value chain, and it might get reused and resurfaced, that there be basically an audit trail back to the original source of the data, which is very important in terms of understanding provenance and the origin of data, to make sure that we have trust in the AI algorithms and the outputs of those algorithms, that they're based on data that we know and trust. And then finally, just back to a couple of points from the prior page, important as people, and this is just as important for small businesses that might be working with governments on procurements as it is for citizens getting services, that transparency of the fact that the government's using AI to power a particular program or approach, and explainable to a layperson so that they understand, all right, here's how we took the data, here's what the algorithms actually do to crunch the data, if you will, to enable people to get to a decision faster. And then here are the outcomes with sort of an audit trail back through that process. Very important that that be present in terms of building trust in AI as it's delivered. So some of the key principles that we try to drive through and have come through our research and came through certainly in the roundtable. I've spoken about several of these: fairness, equity in terms of provision across different populations, explainability we just talked about, and interpretability, so that different populations with different levels of sophistication can interpret the data effectively. Adversarial robustness is a key element. So the fastest way for people not to trust an AI application is for some cybersecurity incident to come in where there's manipulation of the data or theft of the data in a particular system. So being able to kind of provide good cybersecurity around an AI system, critically important, especially in an area like procurement, where there's a lot of business proprietary information that goes through the system in terms of pricing or approaches to take advantage of. And you can just imagine, one company would love to get its hands on a nefarious actor in the system, might use AI to try to interfere, and sort of building in cybersecurity to prevent those kinds of adversaries from doing harm is very important. We talked about transparency. Important analog to transparency is accountability. If something goes wrong, who's accountable? Is it the government? Is it the vendor? Is it the user? Is it a third party who's working through the data? How do we allocate risks and responsibility? And then finally, importantly, probably less so in a procurement sense, but certainly in a citizen service sense, is making sure that AI isn't being used in ways that undermine privacy. The AI can be used to bring together data from a wide variety of sources and basically produce information in a way that can identify a person faster and more readily than could be done with people using sort of traditional modes of analysis. And so, making sure that we build in privacy protections to make sure that those identities don't get improperly associated with particular government programs, don't get improperly released, very important. So all of these considerations informed one of our first reports. It's actually a 2018 report by a scholar named Kevin D'Souza, who actually was at Arizona State and is now at the Queensland Business School in Australia. Kevin wrote this while he was still in the US, and it's basically looking at challenges and opportunities for how do you make sure that AI is going to work in your setting. Once you kind of decide you're going to use AI, how do you set it up for success? And this is where we're going to start to get toward AI for procurement. First is you need to have a sound infrastructure with good security that takes advantage of modern computing applications around the cloud, that takes the best of open source, that you have a strong infrastructure and foundation. If you put AI algorithms on top of a leaky house with a leaky basement, it's not going to, pretty quickly the water is going to leak out of the basement, and you'll run into those security problems that I talked about earlier. Perhaps more than any other technology that we've seen, agile approaches, building systems iteratively, really important to kind of build an application, build a module, check back with users, in a procurement sense, with the business community, with procurement officials, staff, with program officials that the procurement staff is working with, to make sure that each module of an AI application works effectively and moving sort of through the system that way. We talked about training the workforce to make sure not everybody has to become an AI algorithmic engineer or a prompt engineer, one of my favorite new titles, but they should know sort of the basics of artificial intelligence, how it can improve their work, et cetera. At the same time, they can rely on experts and expertise to bring in when there's kind of special problems that they can't handle as a sort of a well-trained workforce. Collaborative approaches to learning more, like the session we're having today, where government's working both across industry, across agencies, across levels of government, across states and localities, and with academic partners. In many ways, as you've seen, our center sort of is a quasi-academic type of institution, in that we're working with academics who are producing all of our content. So collaborating with that community, very, very important. And so we talked about cybersecurity, and the last one I'll talk about is redesigning workflows. Again, like any technology implementation, really important to get the process re-engineered first. But because if you have technology automating a bad process, it's just going to make a bad process faster, and it might magnify the effects of bad data that come out of that process. So looking to simplify the workflow first and then applying technology is a sort of a time-honored tradition, and one that's certainly true with AI. And when I talked about the VA example a few months ago, we talked about that as well as a key design parameter. For each of these slides, I put the link at the bottom to the report that the findings come from. All of these, again, are on our website. There's a couple that aren't, that I'll talk about later. But let's keep going. So let's now get right into the session. I actually wrote an article for the University of Pennsylvania Law School's Regulatory Review. It's one of their law review publications, and kind of brought together a series of thoughts around applying AI to procurement. You see here the link to the article at the bottom. At the federal level, and this is mirrored, I know, in many different states and in similar types of volumes, there are regulations that govern how the procurement process works. And typically, as many of you know, some of you are probably procurement officials yourselves, there are, people have to kind of through many years in the business, and sort of as an expert, kind of get to know what the procurement system looks like, how to go through not just the regulations, but guidance documents associated with it, cases, legal cases, administrative challenges, performance of vendors, et cetera, different requirements for different agencies. Artificial intelligence can make gathering that basic information and looking at trends and opportunities much more fast and effective. So adapting AI to that is a critical advantage of applying AI to procurement. Importantly, just like we know that when we're buying something, when some good procurement practices, let's pilot stuff first. That doesn't apply only to the thing you're buying. It also applies to the use of AI to improve the process. So if you're introducing AI into, let's say, a requirements definition or RFP writing or review of past performance, make sure that you build that by checking out to make sure that the module works. Getting back to that agile point I made earlier. Government working with industry.
Dan,
Yeah.
do you see, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen that says app.zoom
Right.
is sharing yours. Could you hide that so that people
Can
can see the link?
Sorry. Let me hide. No, but it went away. There we go. Okay, good.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Good. Sorry. Okay. So working with industry, really important in terms of industries working often with commercial clients who are evolving the state of the art on different ways to implement and integrate technology into procurement processes. So government can work with industry to learn as it goes and get best practice. And then I'll talk a little bit about maturity and maturing AI over time. Actually, we'll talk about some research we did on a maturity model. So making sure, your organizations may be just at the beginning of the AI journey, or just at the beginning of using AI to improve procurement, and sort of understanding where you are in that maturity cycle and how to move from point A to point B up the scale. Really important, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. One of the early examples of the use of AI for procurement in the federal level was actually done by the Air Force in some research we did with the Partnership for Public Service, an important good government group in DC. We learned about the chief technology officer at the time at the Air Force using AI to basically ingest, that's a term of art for those of you that don't know the AI vernacular, lots of information. In this case is text from regulations, from cases, from training, and enabling an official who's sitting down and saying, all right, let's architect a new procurement strategy for, let's say, maintenance of aircraft, or for tracking of materiel through the Air Force. That process can be very highly voluminous in terms of analytical structures that go into the procurement strategy. And AI can help set up the analyst for a much faster way to gather the information and enable them to get to decisions much more quickly, by gathering information and sort of pointing out, all right, here are the 5 different ways you could do this. The AI sorts through 3,000 documents, and it turns out that basically there are 5 different ways to do something in terms of an acquisition, and it'll rather than the acquisition professional having to take months to figure that out, it can do that in a matter of minutes, and so it can really get that person to a decision much more quickly. So the report talked about some ways to get started. These are consistent with some of the principles. In fact, there will be a number of the conclusions of our research. You'll see similar principles that came through. The first principle around AI is not always the answer. You need to have the investment up front to ensure that you are moving down toward a line that you can be successful. You want to start small and build in an agile fashion. I mentioned, it's always about making sure that the data that goes into a model is as authoritative and accurate as possible. That building the workforce and the skills of the workforce to use AI is really important. The point I made about outside experts. So all of those came through as things that the Air Force learned when it was developing these pilot programs, which was really also 4 or 5 years ago. So we also did some research around how you could use primarily commercial models for AI to improve the overall procurement process. In this case, the scale was the federal government, but every state, has a sort of a smaller scale, but still not insignificant corpus of investment in terms of procurement. Every city works with local contractors to provide products and services. And this report, which was done by a couple of different scholars, one in Texas, actually, who later moved to Michigan. Actually, it's the other way around. Who was at Michigan has later moved to Texas, and the other from Rand, which looked at different parts of the procurement process and how AI could assist. So think about requirements development. As you're sitting down to do, if you're a procurement official or a program official working with procurements, or you're an industry person who's kind of advising the government on what's out there and to shape requirements. Understanding, using AI to see, all right, here's a problem. What has been the approaches to solve that problem, and what were the elements of those approaches? How to array those rather quickly in a way that kind of helps the government develop requirements for solving a particular problem. Competition and pricing, there's a lot of focus. Obviously, procurement's a highly competitive environment. Oftentimes, it's pennies on every $1,000 that can make a difference in terms of a government's final bid decision when there's similar value. And so understanding how best to develop pricing models, to understand sort of what's out there in the industry, how can the government develop a fair and accurate government cost estimate. AI can basically take information and through a natural language process can provide the procurement official, just like in the requirements setting, can provide price information so that they can set up a competitive procurement in ways to get to a fair outcome. Once the contract is awarded, there are some really interesting examples in this report around using sort of large-scale machine learning type algorithms to see how the contractor is performing, to basically provide for better performance over time, to enable the contractor to have a real-time chat with the government in different ways, so that when people are talking to one another, they've kind of gotten over the basics of how performance is going, and they can really focus in on where are the opportunities in terms of high performance from a contractor, or where are the challenges in terms of improving that performance and improving the conversation between government and contractor that is often good, but often gets constrained by real or perceived rules around who can say what in a contract setting. Automating capture of procurement data. This gets back to the data around any procurement, and sort of developing a corpus of information that over time can then be used to shape future procurements, can be used by researchers to understand sort of what are the outcomes of particular programs, and then they can then inform and help to teach future generations of procurement officials. And then just making procurement officials' job easier. Think of if you're a procurement official and you've got dozens of contracts under your purview, or you're a company and you have dozens of contracts with government. That's a lot of work for your staff. And so enabling through different sort of algorithmic approaches to aggregate that, to automate it. Doesn't always have to be AI. Sometimes you can use RPA, robotics process automation, to do some of the basic work here. But these kinds of machine learning technologies really important. And so again, you see here the reference to that report. So I mentioned the maturity model, excuse me, and the ability to work through. This is not necessarily a model that itself was done for procurement per se, but on the next slide, I'll kind of talk about its application to procurement. So I just wanted to show it. And just like any maturity model that you may have seen in your work, it kind of starts at level 1 and gets to level 5. So level 1 being, you're kind of just ad hocing it along, and you might take an AI application here and there. Level 2, you're kind of experimenting, learning, doing pilot projects and prototypes. Level 3, you're actually taking that learning to actually develop those into projects and products, and moving forward in terms of applying those to applications in your organization. And then scaling those throughout your work process. So think about this level as, all right, we've tried it one place, it works there, just like I talked about earlier. Then let's move across in an agile way. Let's move across different elements of our workflow and automate different workflows and bring AI in to do that in a way that's more effective. And then once you go through that, the sort of level 5 is, all right, we've really got AI built throughout our organization, and now we can take a very strategic look at, how can this technology help us to transform in terms of performance? How can it help us achieve strategic goals that maybe 3-5 years out? What are the ways that we can use technology to our advantage as an organization? So that's the basic maturity model for any application that we published in the research that you see here. We did sort of an adaptation. A couple of our authors did this of that model to procurement, and you see here sort of the 5 stages are at the top. And then we went through the researchers went through different parts of what procurement officers actually do. The first thing they usually do is they talk to the customer in the agency to say what's on your mind, what are you trying to get done, how do we work through that? And I'm not going to read every word here because you'll see this, and of course you'll have these slides. And then sort of as you're at a different point in the maturity model, you can see sort of different ways that you can apply that portion of the procurement journey to the maturity model. Training the workforce, making sure that we have trained human resources in terms of applying AI through the procurement organization. And then the next would be applying that training in terms of developing sort of those initial algorithms, and working through and expanding those algorithms so that we have them be a natural part of the procurement process at level 5 at that enterprise transformation. Developing the vision for the organization going forward. So how do we take everything we've learned so far and then create a better organization, a better vision for the organization, a long-term vision, and one that at the enterprise transformation level really integrates AI into transformation of processes. And then finally, and we'll come to this in a few minutes, the application of strong governance and strong ethics. Procurement can get way out of whack. There can be lots of bids, protests, that are done when procurements aren't done according to a set of proper ethical and legal norms. So building in this case, sort of moving through that maturity model and understanding how do we apply ethical data governance across all of the elements of the procurement organization and the procurement process in the organization, very important. So you can see here how you could take these elements that are part of any good procurement organization and then move through maturity in terms of applying AI to each element. And you may come up with other elements in your organization that you could do. Imagine a similar maturing in terms of analysis. So now I'm going to go away from a bit of the theoretical and a little bit more to the practical. And some examples of adopting what we often call intelligent automation, which is a term for sort of a suite of technologies that includes AI, RPA, other sort of modern technologies as they're applied. At the Department of Homeland Security, at the US level, there is an organization called the Procurement Innovation Lab. And the PIL really exists to help DHS use different innovations in procurement more effectively, to implement and integrate technology in that work, to use AI, as you see here, to augment and help DHS employees in this case make better decisions. The PIL talks about, we remember on the last slide, we talked about the first thing a procurement person does is ask the customer, what are they trying to get done? What's the problem that gets solved? And so the PIL helps drive how they integrate AI into that process. Again, agile development, small phases, testing and learning. And again, private sector innovation, reaching out to industry, to academia, for partnerships to learn more about how to apply AI. The PIL is a great model for agencies that are looking for, how do I set up an innovation organization that can help me innovate in the procurement setting? It's one that sits at the federal level, but its lessons can be applied to any level of government. And so you see here the reference to the PIL. Their leader is a woman named Polly Hall, who's a fantastic leader at the federal level, who is a terrific person to reach out to and get tips on in terms of how this has worked at an agency, a large complex agency, and what thoughts might be available for adaptation of this model to smaller agencies at all levels of government. So now I'll go to a city. Interestingly, I don't know if anybody's on from San Jose or the surrounding area, but they kind of took the lead in, all right, let's put together a repository of how do we use AI to help drive procurements at a city level. And you see here the link to that website, and through that link, you can actually see if you're. I know there's a lot of people from city government and from county government. You can actually pull documents through this website that you can model for adaptation in your city, county, or state, and look at some templates and that sort of thing. And they put together, you see here, a coalition of cities, and your city may be part of this coalition already. Or if it's not, if you don't see a dot nearby, feel free to reach out to through this website. It's a terrific resource that we discovered in our research, and that I thought would be particularly appropriate to share in terms of sort of practical ways to implement some of the theoretical and kind of conceptual points that I made earlier. Here's a city that's gone through and actually put together resources that you're able to use to your benefit. So the next sort of section in that same law review article, that law review journal, I should say, that I wrote that article on, that I talked about a few moments ago, there were some other really terrific articles around how to adopt AI for procurement. And so I'll talk about a couple of those articles that I learned a lot from as well. The first is sort of a way to take what has been called the periodic table of acquisition innovation, which is this thing on the lower right, which is a really interesting, it's not an AI document per se, but if you Google that title, you'll get to a really interesting framework for all of the key elements of acquisition, both techniques on the left and ways to automate different elements of that on the right. And basically, Tim Cook's article talked about how AI can really address different challenges that are exogenous to the procurement function itself, but are key to making procurement work effectively. I talked before about cybersecurity, about equity, and making sure that we're serving all parts of society. About adapting AI quickly in the face of rapidly changing complex issues like climate change that are cause lots of different procurement needs after a climate disaster, a hurricane, or a flood. There's lots of different needs that the community has. How do you very quickly ramp up? AI can help kind of discover who are the contractors that have done this elsewhere. Can look at past incidents of similar nature and help array requirements for that, et cetera. So this article really gets into that and talks about how to do so in a way that sets up the process so that biases are mitigated. That can never be eliminated because people are fallible. But how do you set up the program so that you basically ensure that you're not amplifying pre-existing biases, some of which are not known or are implicit in terms of how approaches are done. So really looking at making a conscious effort to look at the data and make sure that we've done a mitigation process. That's all explained in terms of its application to these elements of acquisition that are shown in the periodic table. As we look at AI risks, we've talked about bias, and bias can affect particular groups much more radically based on sort of their historical circumstances. You've heard the term hallucinations, I'm sure, in the context of generative AI. I haven't used that term yet today, but the ability of AI to generate content, generate answers, provide write articles, provide outlines for particular research projects, et cetera. Well, the AI doesn't always get everything right, as we know. So how do we make sure that we're looking for that and providing independent fact checks, if you will, for ensuring that the AI is not producing the improper information. We've talked about the risk of privacy violations and the cybersecurity risk in terms of reliability of the information. So some of the risk mitigations that can apply in any program, procurement or otherwise, again, tie back to data and making sure that the training data that's used to train the AI algorithm is accurate, is not tampered with, robust against tampering over time. That as foundation models are being developed in the AI value chain, if you will, that there are processes to tune those up through I mentioned earlier, the agile experimentation. Don't try to implement a model, everywhere all at once, but do it in stages. Develop an architecture that can kind of provide a guidepost for moving through implementation of that model, and then ensuring that there are people involved. I mentioned before, AI is at its proper use augments and enables people to make better decisions. Well, having people come in and kind of do in the cyber world what's called red teaming, kick the tires, make sure that that the AI is not going off the rails, to borrow two different transportation algorithms, and then ensuring that the AI processes are developed in a way that minimizes human error. So how do people, this is sort of applying user experience to the AI development process. If you've got a system that's really hard to use and doesn't comport with how individuals and teams access computers, they can make mistakes just naturally because they're trying to figure stuff out that are unintentional. So making sure that we sort of develop these algorithms and provide them in ways to the user community that doesn't introduce unintended risks because it's too hard to use. So thinking about risk reduction, another article from that law review was done by a leading scholar at George Washington University at their law school. And she looked at different examples around risk reduction. Again, her lens was through different federal examples, one at DoD, around basically allocating responsibility and establishing a bot that can help Army procurement executives understand sort of issues around responsibility in the delivery of contracts, and then DHS who used procurement to reduce risk in contractor past performance reviews, which are often used to make decisions around best value procurement, and looking at how contractors have performed in the past. And AI can help to ideally reduce human error and really get people to the right. What are the key elements, key differentiators across companies that have very similar past performance because they work in the same industry for oftentimes years or decades. So AI can help the analyst really get to that information, but only if it's done based on good data and sound data, coming back to again to that theme, and in ways that drives efficiency and is designed to mitigate nefarious actors who would come in and manipulate the procurement system, would basically allocate resources to try to get money earlier, inappropriately, to maybe try to get a cash disbursement when one is not warranted based on the terms of the contract. And, the bad guys are out there, and some of them slip through the cracks and get contracts. It's just a natural consequence of a system where humans are involved. And so using AI to help spot those areas of risk and fraud, and hopefully enable staff to reduce them, very, very important. Part of sort of another article from that journal was written around setting up a governance process for ensuring that we have good eyes on risks and mitigation strategies throughout the procurement process, so that there are principles and standards built in both at the process level for staff as you're thinking about design and development of requirements, RFPs, award of contracts, oversight of contracts, et cetera. And also that those principles are built in to reduce the kinds of risks that I described earlier, that there are transparent and principles on ethics that are built into the contracts, that enable the allocation of roles and responsibilities between the government and the contractor, between the provider and the user of AI, and that those principles are based on the same overall criteria that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation: responsible use, transparency, fair use in terms of equity, as AI is developed at all levels of government. And basically sort of setting up a governance process ex ante of the use of AI, sort of getting your team together in an integrated way with lawyers, with with contract officials, with program managers, with technology experts, with AI algorithmic engineers, and sort of working as an integrated project team to say, all right, how are we going to develop a governance process that builds trust over the value chain? And that value chain, it's articulated here. A lot of people think of governance as sort of at the left side of this chart. We need governance to develop strategy. We need governance to plan. And those are very important. But as AI is introduced into a procurement system and implementations occur in terms of contract, RFP issuance, contract review, contract award, sort of setting up an idea of who is actually governing that AI model and that integration throughout the procurement lifecycle. Very important to think about that element of governance, which is often an element that gets undervalued. Most organizations think about governance as, all right, we have our strategic planning process and let's kind of establish governance around that. Not so much around how do we make sure that we're using responsible technology, responsible processes, in this case, responsible AI, throughout the life cycle of the application, when you're developing a procurement, when you're operating it, and then when you're essentially managing the portfolio of activities and using AI to make that more effective. So this is going to be the last slide, and we can get into a discussion, and I look forward to that. Basically, we did a book, right, where our center is kind of like a think tank. So think tanks write books, and we wrote one just last year called Transforming the Business of Government. And one of the chapters from that book was done by a number of scholars, led by one from Boise State. I don't know if there's anybody from Idaho on the line with us. But she looked at how you could get back. It gets back to this use of AI to ensure responsible human-centric application of AI into procurement. And I mentioned this is also about procuring AI tools for the public sector. So this is both about how do you actually use AI to improve procurement, but it's also about what to look for in terms of buying AI for your agency, for your department. And I don't need to talk through a lot of these principles are going to sound familiar. So if I say them again, I'll just be repeating myself from earlier slides, which is really interesting. Part of the conclusions that we draw, if you take a sort of do a meta analysis of principles over the studies that I've talked about in the last 45 minutes or so, there's really a lot of commonality around this idea of ethical application, bias reduction, privacy protection, interoperability. Here we talk a lot. We have something we haven't talked about before is sustainability. We know that AI requires a lot of power, and there's a lot of focus on the environmental impact as we get into more and more use of AI and the computing and data center requirements that are needed to power those systems. We've talked about equity, social impact, and we've talked about governance. So again, here's another example of a document that's been based on research and is consistent with a lot of the experience that we've talked about before. So, so through this talk, I've tried to give you both sort of a conceptual construct, some research that kind of frames that construct, some practical examples and resources to help you get started. And I really look forward to the conversation that we might have in the next part of the discussion. And I'm going to stop sharing. And Hannah, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm going to stop recording.